Who are some of the players you should be targeting with your last picks in fantasy football drafts, including Sam Howell and Ryan Tannehill? It's time to break it down right here and right now as we close another week and close our mock draft look on Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. As usual, I'm one of your co-hosts, Vinnie, Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL and fantasy football for sportingnews.com.
Hi, I'm Michelle Magdziuk. I'm a researcher for NFL Network and fantasy analyst for NFL.com.
Yeah, Michelle's back again. We've been doing a lot of mock draft presenting here this week, helping you dominate your draft. A lot of you have your drafts this weekend and also over Labor Day and that extended holiday. So getting you ready, we'll have, of course, more analysis for you next week as well. So this is not it before you're on the clock here, but we do want to wrap up the look at different ways you can draft here with a show focusing on guys you can target with the late picks, as well as what you want to do if you're playing the streaming defense game and you don't want to use a defensive pick early in your drafts. These are teams you can target early in the season as your last pick. Hopefully you're not using kickers because we're not going to talk about kickers on the show. So you'll just figure those out as you go along. But we'll break down here our favorite last picks, including our streaming defenses here on the show. First, I got to tell you, this episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy. UnderdogFantasy.com is where you should visit them, or you find them on the App Store, and sign up with the promo code Locked On to get your first deposit doubled up to $100. Thanks again for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first day. We're your destination to become the smartest fantasy football player in the league. We're part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, Michelle, we've been talking about some of these players we're going to bring up today quite a bit as we've done drafting and just breaking down positions as we've gone along with our rankings. So we both, for this first segment, have picked three veterans. These are players, obviously, they're just not rookies that we like. It can be year two and beyond here that we're looking at that could have value in fantasy leagues. That this is when you're looking for that high upside player late in your draft. So, Michelle, I'll let you take it here. Give me your three choices here, and we're picking from any positions.
Yeah, so it's all going to depend what position you're really looking for here when you're eyeing that breakout player. So my first guy is Sam Howell, right? Quarterback for the Commanders. If I were to have spent a second or third round pick on Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, or even, spent up on Fields or Herbert, I'm not looking to draft a quarterback again late, but this is if I select, I waited a bit. I selected Dak Prescott or Deshaun Watson, or even further with Anthony Richardson, Kirk Cousins. Like, I want another guy there in case those other ones don't come through for me this year. So Sam Howell is my favorite guy to take late. I've talked about him all off season long, but we've also seen him really produce in the preseason as well. He seems to really be striving in Eric Bieniemy's new offense. He's connecting. Hopefully Terry McLaurin is healthy and back by week one, but you can also see that connection with Jahan Dotson. He has the mobility. He has the strong arm. We already saw him put up a good amount of fantasy points in his first start, 18.3 fantasy points. That was good enough to be the quarterback 7 in week 18 last year. I just truly think with all these weapons in a great offense, with his mobility, he's going to be a very solid fantasy quarterback at the least, and he has super high upside. So I want to take him with that last pick there. I know you also have a quarterback on your list. Do you want to get to that before I go through my other two?
Yeah, and I'm going to add something on Sam Howell. This is a player. Michelle says I'm selling her on Jahmyr Gibbs and some other players, but Michelle has talked me into Sam Howell. In fact, I put him on the deep sleeper list there I did at sportingnews.com, and our friends at Sports Grid, I did a hit on their show yesterday and raved about Sam Howell, and now that clip is what they're using. So I'm on the record now on Sam Howell as well, and I came around just because I needed to see him, right? And that was the thing, as I've seen him in the preseason. he's actually going to be featured in our preseason all-star team here for his work. He's just been outstanding. And the other thing I'm just going to add quickly on Sam Howell is that this team could be terrible overall. They're not expected to win a lot of games. That's going to be a lot of garbage points potentially available for Sam Howell in the second half. So I like that aspect as well. We can't forget about that. Now, my guy, I think this team is also going to be terrible. Ryan Tannehill. I don't know if the Titans are going to be more than a 6-win team, but I look at Tannehill. He's been pretty good when he's the starter and healthy for this team. And we've been talking about his weapons a little bit, right? DeAndre Hopkins and Chigakonkwo, Traylon Burke should be ready and just had a minor injury there that he should be good to go in week 1. So that's a pretty good starting array of weapons here for your quarterback. We know he plays well off Derrick Henry in the running game. He's also produced a little bit on the ground with his legs, and he can score touchdowns for you. So Tannehill's just guy maybe just being forgotten. He's buried all the way, I think, at quarterback 31. I mean, that's kind of crazy that we're just dumping on Ryan Tannehill. I think he can be a lot better than that. And for a late-round pick, I think Sam Howell's a ton of upside, and maybe you're going to have to be a little bit more aggressive to get him. But Tannehill, not going anywhere, and a guy that you can easily get as a backup quarterback.
Yeah, and just a couple seasons ago, he was exactly this guy that you took with one of your last picks, and he ended up well outperforming expectations. And he's been dealing with injuries or bad weapons, both of those things. And now hopefully he can stay healthy. And DeAndre Hopkins can be such that difference maker for any quarterback. I prefer my Sam Howell one, but if you miss out on him, Ryan Tannehill's a nice
He's a little
second
bit more
option there.
expensive, I think, now. We've talked him up, so that's one thing I'm a
Yeah.
little bit worried about, but still targeted.
He still has like 18th round ADP, but yeah, that probably will increase here over this weekend. But I know we both have a tight end on our list as well, so I'll get to mine first. It's Jake Ferguson of the Cowboys. Just so many great reports coming out of camp about him. He's a second-year tight end, 4th-round pick last year. And he seems to really have control of that Dalton Schultz role, which Dalton Schultz scored the 6th most fantasy points per game among tight ends over the last 2 years. So that's been a very important role when it comes to fantasy football. But it's not even just Dalton Schultz, right? Dak Prescott has supported a top 12 fantasy tight end in 6 of his 7 career seasons. He really prefers that tight end, his top tight end. He's going to utilize them. He's going to lean on him. And I think this offense, sure, they can say they want to be run heavy. They don't have the personnel for that. So I think they're going to have to pass more than they want to. Jake Ferguson is going to have scoring opportunities. The Cowboys have been the top scoring offense now for the last couple of years. So I think this is truly a guy that you can take with your last pick. And he has potential to be that breakout tight end like we've had with our Mark Andrews and our Darren Wallers in the past, where you drafted him so late and they just really broke out. I think that's your best option here late in your drafts for the tight end position. Again, if you spent early on Kelsey or Andrews or Hawkinson, Ferguson's not going to be your late round pick. But this is if you waited on your tight end for a little bit.
Yeah, and I've liked this guy going back to Wisconsin. He's a very talented all-around tight end, but his receiving skills have improved here. So going back scouting-wise with him. And I also think it's not guaranteed that Michael Gallup is going to be the third key target here. They've kind of not been high on Michael Gallup of late. I mean, Brandon Cooks have zoomed past him into the 2 spot here behind CeeDee Lamb. So again, that's what I like to see about tight ends. Can they work themselves into being at least a top 3 option for their quarterback? And Jake Ferguson, yeah, the history is there, Michelle. You pointed out very well with Dalton Schultz. That was a connection that Dak Prescott loved over the past couple of years. He's going to look at that tight end. This offense is going to be a little bit more West Coasty, if that's a word. And that means more tight end and running back passes here in the short to intermediate game. So I do like that selection quite a bit here. So I do have a tight end and very similar, and something has developed here that has helped this pick is Tyler Conklin of the Jets. And my pick here with Conklin is the fact that I had this before we had the Corey Davis news that he was retiring from football. Now that moves him up a little bit. It also moves up another guy like late to throw a dart at is Mecole Hardman. I just think I'm not sure that Allen Lazard is going to be your next guy after Garrett Wilson in this offense for Aaron Rodgers. We know he likes tight ends. We know Conklin had that flash from Minnesota. This is why he got signed by the Jets last year. And I think he was underutilized, had some opportunities there. And we know the quarterback situation was bad. So CJ Uzomah is more of a blocker here. I can see the Jets knowing some of this limitation without Corey Davis on the outside, that, hey, we might pivot to more 12 personnel here for Aaron Rodgers. It's worked before in Green Bay with Nathaniel Hackett and the situation. So 12 personnel means he's on the field more, maybe less of a Randall Cobb or Mecole Hardman in the slot. So that's some opportunities here. So Tyler Conklin, I could see him getting something like 606 touchdowns, 600 yards there, maybe 40, 50 catches, and getting into that range here. So that's why I like him here late. Another veteran pick for you.
Yeah, and so we have seen Aaron Rodgers, right? Like with random tight ends that just kind of go off. Like the one that comes to mind is Robert Tonyan when he had double-digit touchdowns out of nowhere. That could be Tyler Conklin's year. I don't expect him to have a ton of receiving yards or receptions, but I don't think either of us would be shocked if Tyler Conklin comes out and has 8 to 10 touchdowns this year with Aaron Rodgers. So that's kind of the upside you're chasing there with him. And then we both have now, I have a wide receiver, you have a running back for our last pick here when it comes to the veterans that you can take late round. I chose all second year guys, so slight veterans, but my wide receiver is Romeo Doubs of the Packers. Second year wide receiver. I know we just did a mock draft a couple days ago and you took him, I think, in the 9th or 10th round, but I do think in most drafts, you're still going to be able to find him in the 13th, 14th round, as long as you're playing with people who are like super, super in love with like invested in fantasy football all year round, right? So Romeo Doubs is a guy that I just am going to take a shot on because he's playing in an offense with a bunch of unknowns, and he could easily be the wide receiver one when you have Christian Watson, his teammate, that's also a second year guy, going 100 picks before him. With this uncertainty, I'm definitely going to take the shot on Doubs over Watson. Doubs had the second most targets per game on the Packers last year, behind only Allen Lazard, who's now playing with Aaron Rodgers on the Jets. And Jordan Love, throughout the preseason, he's had a very strong connection with Doubs. So Doubs has made up 4 of Love's 12 completions, 73 of his 130 passing yards, and 1 of his 2 touchdowns over the preseason. So far, what we're seeing with our eyes is that Love prefers Doubs when it comes to targets and in the workload here. So I'm going to take a shot on him late if I'm looking to add a wide receiver to my team.
Yeah, I do like that for sure. And I hint when we get into the rookies in the next segment, I might have another Packers wide receiver there. So, yeah, Christian Watson is going way too high. Let's not forget Doubs was the guy that was getting the buzz early in the season, right? When Watson was on the shelf, he was making some big plays. Then Watson just scored just a crazy amount of touchdowns with very few catches, and everyone fell in love. He was making the big plays in prime time. So just watch out. I mean, Doubs could easily be the number one with Green Bay. They're kind of equal, I think, in the organization's eyes as secondary receivers here. So something to watch there. My choice is also in the NFC North, but I'm going with Ty Chandler. I don't love Alexander Madison as much as you do, Michelle. Like, I get the opportunity and the situation, but I'm not in love with the player. And I'm not sure this is the best situation for him here. I thought this running game was inefficient last year. I think it could get better for sure, but I just don't know what we're going to get from Madison if they run him a little bit more, because he's had injury issues. I remember there's some times where Dalvin Cook was on the shelf. Okay, we're going to go to Madison. Then he was not available all of a sudden. So that's something I'm worried about here. So Ty Chandler has some upside. I think they look at Kenny Nwangwu as being a special teams guy, very important on their kickoff returns and all that. So I think that's where his work is going to be. So the opportunities here for Chandler or Dwayne McBride. And Dwayne McBride, again, don't worry about him. He's like in the 300s. You can get him on the waiver wire if something happens here early in the season. But when I look at the backs that are available, Ty Chandler, I like his running style, also out of North Carolina, like Sam Howell. I just like some of the things he does, and I think opportunity could knock, and I don't think they'll be long with Madison if he's disappointing early.
Yeah, I can't get on board with the Ty Chandler pick just because of how, in love I am with Alexander Madison this year. But he's a good hand. Like, I consider him like a handcuff to Madison. So if Madison were to get hurt, Ty Chandler would be the top priority pickup. Or, if you do draft Madison in the 5th and you want to take Ty Chandler late just to have that insurance, you could do that as well. But I do envision this backfield to just be a heavy one guy backfield this year. And that's going to be Madison because I said so.
We'll see how this plays out. I'm a little bit nervous, I think, about the whole Minnesota running game, but we'll see. And we'll see how that plays out. I think it's going to be interesting to watch there and see what Dalvin Cook does with the Jets and see if they made the right decision there in moving on from him. So, all kinds of interesting stuff in Minnesota with their offense. We'll talk about rookies we want to target here. 3 rookies each we've selected that you can consider with your late round or last pick here in your 2023 fantasy football drafts. We'll get into that moment. Before we do that, I got to tell you that this episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is also brought to you by Harry's, and I'm a Harry's user, and I cannot be more pleased. It's just so simple. No matter why you shave, Harry's has you covered from every angle for the best shave of your life, and really the prices can't be beat. And really, it's awesome because it's so convenient. It comes in the mail. It's something I set and forget and don't think about that. Whenever I need Harry's with the shaving cream and razors, they're right there at my doorstep, ready to go. And you can get a better quality shave at a better price than other razors when you get Harry's delivered right to your door. And it's fantastic. And again, I have also used some of their other products, their eye cream and lotions. They're very helpful as well for you. So you can put that in a package for you, and it's really great. And it's a fantastic value there at harrys.com. And once you get Harry's, that's the only way you want to get your razors delivered here. Trust me, it's just so simple, convenient, and great product as well. So everything is going to keep your skin healthy, looking great. And the blades are working, and they're always give me a close, comfortable shave every time. So Harry's has the highest customer satisfaction rating in the industry as well. So it's not just me, and they're offering a no risk trial here. So if you don't like your shave, no worries, it's on them. So get your best shave ever this summer with Harry's razors and skincare products. Get a $13 starter kit there for just $3 at harrys.com/NFL. That's harrys.com/NFL for a $3 starter kit, and take care of your skin with Harry's now. All right, Michelle, we are going to continue and look at our favorite last picks in our drafts here, probably around the ADP of 180, 200, somewhere there, depending how deep your league is. And now we're going to focus on rookies. We love talking about rookies, and we've talked about some of these guys before, but Michelle, you picked 3 wide receivers. I've got a little bit of diversification here, running back, tight end, and a wide receiver. So I'll let you go. The first receiver I know you can't wait to talk about.
Yes, I know. So wide receivers are hard, right? Especially rookies, because it can take some time for them to develop and really break out. But over the last handful of years, we've actually seen rookie wide receivers that were not expected to do much in their rookie year go late in fantasy drafts and provide great fantasy relevance to managers. So that's like Terry McLaurin, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Cooper Kupp, Chase Claypool. Even DK Metcalf and AJ Brown were expected to do a whole lot because of the situations they landed in. So there are guys, rookie wide receivers that you can find late in your drafts that could be huge for your team. So my 3 guys, these are all rookies, all wide receivers. Tank Dell from the Texans, Jalen Hyatt of the Giants, and Marvin Mims of the Broncos. So Tank Dell, I've been talking about. I've been loving on him all off season long, but I think this preseason has made me feel very confident in him as well, because he is a smaller guy. He's like 5'8", and he weighed in at 165 pounds at the combine. So that did worry you a bit. No matter, he was so productive at Houston, where he played at college, led the FBS in receiving yards and receiving touchdowns last year. It was great the year prior as well. But coming into the NFL, you were thinking, can he handle it with his small body? Can he get open against NFL corners? He can. I mean, that's what we've seen so far. He is always open. So I'm not worried about his small frame at this moment anymore. And he has a legit possibility to be the wide receiver 1 for the Texans. And I think he is. If I had to put a bet down on who leads in targets this year for this offense, it would be Tank Dell. And then moving on to Jalen Hyatt, he's a 3rd round wide receiver, but it was his whole situation was kind of weird. I mean, prior to the NFL draft, like a couple months prior, he was being touted as a 1st round wide receiver. He was consistently being mocked in the end of the 1st round, and then he fell all the way to the 3rd round to the Giants. But we're overlooking his speed and his production he had at Tennessee. He had over 1,200 receiving yards, 15 receiving touchdowns in 12 games at Tennessee last year, averaged 18.9 yards per reception on 67 receptions. So bear with me here, but he's one of 6 guys to play in the SEC and average 18 plus yards per reception on 60 plus receptions in a single season over the last 10 years. The other guys were Jamar Chase, Mike Evans, Devonta Smith, Jerry Jeudy, and Jamison Williams, all who were ended up being first-round picks in the NFL draft, and most of them being pretty great for fantasy. We saw him already put up a 33-yard receiving touchdown this past weekend. I think he's a guy that can have a lot of big plays this year. He may not be consistent, but he could have a lot of big weeks. And then Marvin Mims is someone that we need to just throw in here with the Broncos. Now that Jerry Jeudy's dealing with a hamstring injury, he's had a lot of those kind of soft tissue issues throughout his short career so far. And I'm not sure Jerry Jeudy will be back to start the season. I know there's optimism, but there may not be. The team already lost Tim Patrick. So now it's Cortland Sutton and Marvin Mims possibly as the starters. And he also was explosive at Oklahoma. So I like that connection there with Russell Wilson really being able to sling it. We know he has a good deep ball. So I think Marvin Mims is a guy you need to keep an eye on. If Jerry Jeudy's not going to be back to start the season, Marvin Mims could be a steal there with your last pick.
Yeah, those are good choices. I mean, just based on the situations alone, like I think there's some similarities with your Dell and Hyatt picks. And I'll say this, that I don't want to invest in Nico Collins or John Mechie or Robert Woods. I'd rather go for the upside guy later. I don't want to invest in Sterling Shepard or Darius Slayton. And keep in mind, there's not really receivers being drafted. I mean, you have Paris Campbell and Wandale Robinson. Behind Darren Waller, I mean, pretty much there's just a drop-off, and nobody's really thinking about Giants wide receivers. So I'd rather take a shot on the upside guys late, and Dell and Hyatt both have that. And Dell maybe a little bit Percy Harvin. I don't think they'll use him in a hybrid role, but I think that's a guy you can point to that was a bit undersized at wide receiver, but was a big asset in fantasy a while back here. So Marvin Mims, you're right. I mean, Tim Patrick is gone. Jerry Jeudy is not trusted to stay healthy. Cortland Sutton has not gotten a lot of buzz. I mean, I think he's now helped by the Jeudy injury, but Mims has a big opportunity. They like him, and they also moved on from KJ Hamler. So this is a really good trio, Michelle, and I will offer one more wide receiver in my mix here for you. And you can comment on him before I get into the other guys there at other positions. But Jayden Reed, you had Romeo Doubs. We talked about Christian Watson going way too early. Jayden Reed is going to play a key role. And I think it comes down to Jayden Reed or Luke Musgrave, who's going to be the key rookie target, right? I mean, I think the Packers could use some 12, but they're pretty thin at tight end now. They're not as deep as they were. They lost Robert Tonyan, Mercedes Lewis. So they used to run a lot of 12. I think they'll run a little bit more 11 with 3 receivers, and probably Jayden Reed lining the slot, although the other guys can do it at times. So that should be good. He's in a key role for the Packers that they're going to stretch the field horizontally and a little bit of vertically with the other 2 guys. But Reed, I think, could be a little bit like Tank Dell, being schemed open in the middle of the field. So I'll add him to the mix. What are your thoughts on him with those 3 guys?
I did consider Jayden Reed, but then when you're looking at the ADP between Romeo Doubs and Jayden Reed, it's just really not that big of a gap. So if I'm going to take a chance on one of these guys, I'm going to take one that's entering a second year into the system. It seems to already have the connection with Love a bit. So I would lean him, but Jayden Reed, I mean, it's the same type of situation, right? He could be the guy that ends up breaking out in this offense just because he's a rookie instead of a second year guy. All of these guys in the Packers offense, they all have the same opportunity. It's just which one comes through. I mean, you got to put your bet on whatever guy you feel most confident on.
Yeah, and that's how I feel. It just, again, if I'm going to be maybe I'll be the aggressive person who takes Romeo Doubs, and you're forced to take Jayden Reed in your league because he's the guy that's available late in their draft. So I think it's worth, again, it's a high upside offense. It's worth having some piece of it here and not investing too high in Watson. So my other 2 guys, I have another Titan. Yes, believe it or not. It's Tyjae Spears. And I like this kid out of Tulane. And Hassan Haskins, I mean, come on. This guy kind of not the smartest guy with what happened here off the field. I just think that Spears gives them a lot more explosiveness if something were to happen with Derrick Henry. Now, I think there's a loose comparison to be made here. from a couple years ago. What had happened when Derrick Henry went on the shelf? You had Donta Foreman and Dontrell Hilliard. I would say Spears is more the Hilliard type, and if they needed Haskins in a key role, I think you would say he's more the Donta Foreman type. But I think this offense wants to pivot to being a little bit more explosive. They need a guy out of the backfield that can catch passes when Derrick Henry's not on the field. And again, this is a high upside handcuff here with Tyjae Spears. I do like Jerome Ford as well, but he's got a bit of an injury now with the hamstring. So I'm hoping he's healed enough to do that. But Spears, an exciting rookie that you can look at, obviously has a key path to some production should Derrick Henry get hurt. And then you look at Michael Mayer. This is a guy that I've been liking a lot at tight end. Again, I looked at the numbers of Foster Moreau and Waller last year, more than 800 receiving yards between those two tight ends. So there's availability. That had combined for 6 TDs. So there's definitely some numbers to be had from that tight end spot. And again, there's not a lot of competition. Could he be the third target behind Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers? Absolutely. And it's a great alignment here with Jimmy Garoppolo and Josh McDaniels to get that number from the tight end.
Yeah, Tyjae Spears of the Titans, I almost did put him as well because he has also looked impressive this whole preseason, is getting good reports out of camp. And Derrick Henry is hitting that age. He's getting a bit older. So maybe his body can't hold up, or maybe the Titans want to keep Derrick Henry healthy, right? Maybe they realize, oh, he is getting older. We can't give him 400 touches every single season. So maybe they kind of use both Henry and Spears. It's probably just Henry's backfield, but he's a nice last round pick just in case. We're going to finish our episode by talking about our favorite defenses to take with your last pick in your draft. That should be the last one, right? All these other guys we're talking about, that's like your last skill position player to take.
Yeah, your penultimate
defense,
pick.
Yeah, defense or kicker, you wait till your very, very last round. But we have some defenses that we really like to start the year that you can take with your last pick in the draft. So we'll give you our top choices there in our last segment. But before we get to that, I got to talk about Underdog, my favorite fantasy app. August is here, and you know what that means, the official start of fantasy football drafting month. Get championship ready for your home league by trying out Best Ball on Underdog Fantasy. All you do is one live snake draft, no waivers, no trades. Underdog sets your best lineup every week. It's personally my favorite way to mock draft and prepare for my home leagues, as everyone has a stake in the team they draft, and you get real accurate ADP of where players are being drafted. Or if you're already drafted and you're sad that it's already over, you can join best ball tournaments in order to crave your fantasy football needs prior to the season. You can try it out with Underdog's Best Ball Mania Tournament. The largest fantasy football contest of all time is back, and even bigger, with $15 million of total prizes up for grabs, including an absurd $3 million going to the winner. Visit UnderdogFantasy.com or find them in the App Store and sign up with promo code LOCKEDON to get your first deposit doubled up to $100. That's Underdog Fantasy, promo code LOCKEDON. Vinny, I'm like too excited to talk about defenses. I don't know why. I actually really like playing with defenses in fantasy, and I like streaming them, right? So I'm not ever going with the early picks. I'm not going to pay up for the Eagles or Cowboys this year. I love looking at the matchups and streaming defenses. Is that kind of your strategy here as well when it comes to defense and fantasy?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I've lucked into an elite defense. Like a couple years ago, I had the Jaguars, and I just rode them, and they were awesome. And I typically don't end up with the best defense on the board unless it's like that, right? I'm going after a deep sleeper that, oh, it's the Jaguars. People might not think they're an elite defense, but they had the players that year to be that team. So sometimes I'll just get that defense by accident, but I do not target that defense early because it never finishes in the order that people draft these defenses. It's always someone surprising. And I think everyone's like the Patriots defense, and you go after them, but like it's about the plays you make. And you can't play the Patriots in week 1. They're playing the Eagles. So why did you waste a pick on a defense you're not even going to be able to play in week 1? I mean, even you can look at the Bills and Jets. They're loaded, but they're playing each other in week 1. Are you going to really trust any of those guys right away? I mean, it's really hard to say that. So I want a playable defense. I also consider them being disposable. Like I'll just here, see you later. I'm going to go for another defense, but I always like to work in advance. And I think we're going to give you some of that advice as well, starting with your first defense that you're taking with your last pick.
Yeah, so my first one, it's the Commanders, right? And they're definitely going to be available to you because people are not, pumped about the Commanders defense, but they're playing the Cardinals in the first week.
Yeah.
So that's the number one team you're going to want to play against. And then the next week after that is at the Broncos, which, especially with all their injuries right now, I think that's a really ideal matchup as well. But with all that, with the matchups, I also think the Commanders defense is being overlooked because of how
Yeah.
poorly they started this last year. So weeks 1 through 5, they were a terrible, terrible defense. But weeks 6 through 18, they're allowing just 17.9 points per game. They had 17 takeaways, and they averaged the third most fantasy points per game during that span. I mean, that's 6 through 18. That's a huge chunk of the season. And they're averaging they were the third best fantasy defense during that time, behind only the Patriots and the Cowboys. They scored even more than the Eagles and the 49ers during that span. And you have to take those 4 teams a couple rounds earlier, at least, while no one's even looking at the Commanders. Now, in weeks 3 and 4, they have to play the Bills and the Eagles. So maybe at that point you want to move on from
Yeah.
them. But like, if I have my defense that I take where I can confidently start them weeks 1 and 2, I can figure it out on the waivers after that for my first team. Who's your first favorite defense to go for?
Well, it's interesting because you did say the Commanders and they are playing the Broncos. I actually have a defense that is playing the Commanders in week 2. That's the Broncos. And why I like the Broncos is this team tends to be better at home, especially early in the season. And they're playing the Raiders in week 1. That's manageable here. I think there's an opportunity to make some plays there. And they get the Commanders. And as much as I like Sam Howell and really Jimmy Garoppolo, and we've talked about Michael Mayer, I think these can be mistake-prone offenses as well. They might be in situations where they're throwing quite a bit. These are favorable games for the Broncos right away, so they might have a lead in the second half. They have enough in the pass rush and some players in the back end, including Pat Surtain, too, and Justin Simmons to make plays. So that's one thing that is underrated, Michelle, is that, and I can say that for Commanders as well, look at the players who can actually make plays and where are they going to get the big plays from. And with the Commanders, you have Montez Sweat, and I think hopefully have Chase Young to have a little bit more impact. And you have Cameron Curl, who really makes a ton of big plays on the back end. So find guys
Darren
where the
Payne,
turnovers
Jonathan
stack.
Allen, their defensive line
Yeah.
is stacked.
Yeah, so they have players to make play. Like, look to see who's going to make a play on the ball because you're looking for sacks and interceptions. You're not looking for, we're going to hold this team to this many yards, but not do things and make plays that happen. So these are teams that can make plays happen. And I do like the Broncos mainly because they're at home here in the first 2 games. And that's another thing I think about, Michelle, is like I like to play defenses when they're at home in more favorable situations than I do on the road, maybe in the same matchup. So I'm going with them. And just like with the Commanders, it gets bad there after week 2. You get them on the road with the Dolphins and Bears, and then they got to host Aaron Rodgers of the Jets. So Broncos, again, super cheap, just like the Commanders. Afterthoughts here that you can target. Now, Michelle, I know you're probably also excited to talk about your other defense, and this one makes more sense and maybe a defense that you should still play in week 1, maybe.
Yeah. So the Pittsburgh Steelers, they typically get drafted pretty high, but this year their ADP has been low. People aren't going towards them. And I think it's because of their inconsistent year last year and not being great fantasy scorers. But the thing is, TJ Watt, who you just talked about, who's your playmaker, right? TJ Watt's like the best defensive playmaker in the league. And he was missing for half the season and then injured parts of the others, even when he was playing. But the Steelers with TJ Watt in the field and without are just 2 completely different defenses. They allowed 100 fewer total yards per game in games with Watt than without him. They allowed 25 points without Watt, 16.9 with him per game. They had 32 sacks in 10 games with TJ Watt, only 8 in the 7 games without him, and 18 takeaways in the 10 games with Watt and only 5 in the 7 games without him. Just absurd how different it is. And so I think this defense overall, they made some really nice additions and changed out the weaknesses. So I do think that this could be one of the best defenses in the league. And then you look at their beginning schedule and you may say, well, they have to play the 49ers. Sure, but it's at home. It's against Brock Purdy, who just is coming off a major elbow injury and has had very limited time to prepare for the season. And then also Kyle Shanahan's offenses start very slow typically and are not great in week 1. So I'm not worried about starting the Steelers defense in week 1. And then they get the Browns at home. Then they play the Raiders and the Texans. You have a defense you can start for your first 4 weeks for certain that I feel really good about. So the Steelers, I think, would go higher than the Commanders. So you may not always get to land them. But if the Steelers are there for your last pick, smash that.
Yeah, I think you've convinced me, Michelle. I'm going to go to all my cheat sheets, do a black underline, gold highlighter. I'm going to really go after the Steelers because when you look at this team, I mean, you mentioned TJ Watt, but you have Hayward. You've got now Patrick Peterson, maybe in a complimentary role. You got Joey Porter Jr. It's just a loaded defense. And don't forget Minka Fitzpatrick, of course, roaming and making a lot of plays. So they've got a lot of players you can go after. And you make a great call about the 49ers. Remember that disastrous game they had last year against the Bears? Oh, gosh. That was bad. And that was it in week 1. So they do start very slow. And it was really bad last year. So I do like that. And then you can play them for the first month of the season. It's a great call there. I love it. And again, the 49ers not maybe as great on the offensive line. They did lose Mike McGlinchey in free agency. So a little bit of weakness up front to maybe get to the quarterback and rattle Purdy. And I think by far this is Purdy's toughest to start based on his elbow injury on the road against TJ Watt in this defense. So I think this could be a crash down to earth game for Purdy to start the season, maybe have the 49ers rethink a few things. But we'll depart from there, from Pittsburgh, and we'll go to Green Bay, another team that I like this year. And they start pretty well. They get Justin Fields and the Bears in week 1, and Fields still can make mistakes. They are on the road. I just said I prefer them at home, but to me, playing the Bears is like a home game for the Packers, and so is playing Atlanta. There's going to be a lot of Packers fans in Georgia. You know that for that game. And Desmond Ridder hasn't looked all that great. He can make some mistakes here. This Packers defense has looked very good so far with maybe putting it together a little bit better this season. Jair Alexander on the back end, Kenny Clark, a lot of impact younger playmakers as well. So I do like that matchup there in week 2. So week 1 and week 2, I think you can definitely play them. And really, I think I could also consider them in week 3 in their home opener against Derek Carr and the Saints. I mean, the Saints offense could go through some lumps. They're not going to have Alvin Kamara for that game. And Lambeau, they're always a little bit better there. So that's another team I'm looking at. So Steelers, Packers, if you're looking for some classic and gold to do some damage here with defense, I think that's a good way to go.
Yeah, the Packers defense confused me last year because on paper, their defense is stacked with playmakers and really talented guys. They should have been so much better than they were last year. But now with this year, knowing like you have Jordan Love as a starter, hopefully they're really putting focus on fixing that defense, just overall the whole system. So they could be a nice pick as well if all of these really talented players that they have at every level could just come together and play as well as they should.
Yeah, and really comes down to cohesiveness as a unit here. So really looking forward to drafting these in a lot of leagues. And sometimes I actually get sniped on some of these, and it really is annoying. But I don't know if we'll get sniped on these this year. I think there's nothing worse than getting sniped on your last or second to last pick. Is there, Michelle?
No, but I have a good feeling no one's sniping me on the Commanders. Like I might get sniped on the Steelers, but I will have my backup at least because I don't think anyone's even thinking about drafting the Commanders on defense this year. Do it. Telling you.
We'll see how it plays out, and maybe if we're in your league, don't do it. So, but yeah, if you listen to us, go ahead and snipe away from other people, and make sure you get these defenses here because I think you'll be pleased with the results in your league. And don't sleep on defense; they can have a big impact on your scoring for sure. That's what we learned. So, again, good week of mock draft analysis. What you should do with picks all across the board here on Locked On Fantasy Football. We'll have a lot more prepping you for the season. We're almost here for our week 1 analysis. They'll be coming up soon here. So thanks again for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. And everydayers will bring you a lot more here next week. Locked On Fantasy Football is your destination to become the smartest fantasy football player in your league. Part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. For Locked On Fantasy Football, and good luck in your drafts this weekend coming up. This has been Vinnie Iyer.
And I'm Michelle Magdziuk. Bye, y'all.